The rain didn't just fall. It hammered the tarmac in sheets so thick the runway lights vanished into a blur. Inside the control tower, the air was tense, radios hissing with half-heard voices. Then came the announcement again. All flights are grounded until further notice. Every pilot in the room understood. No one would challenge the storm. But from the far side of the hangar, the massive doors began to roll open. A lone figure stepped into the downpour, helmet tucked under her arm, eyes locked on the swirling sky. "If the target's still breathing out there, I'm going up," she said, her voice cutting through the rain. "Welcome to Velvo Stories, cinematic tales of courage, resilience, and the moments that define us. These stories are fictional, crafted to inspire and move you. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your story." It had been building all day, the kind of weather front that doesn't just roll in, but arrives like a siege engine. By the time it reached the base, the clouds were a single unbroken wall of steel. Wind tore across the airfield in violent bursts, bending the flagpole until the rope inside clanged like a bell. Every few seconds, lightning split the sky into a jagged white scar, and the thunder came so fast on its heels that the sound seemed to live in the bones of the buildings. In the operations room, the big digital map cast an eerie glow on every face. A blinking red marker pulsed in the corner of the screen. A recon unit stranded in hostile terrain over 300 miles away. Their last transmission had been clipped, a voice shouting coordinates before static swallowed the rest. The general in charge, a broad-shouldered man with a voice like gravel, stood with his arms folded. "No aircraft can make it through that front," he said, scanning the room for disagreement. There was none. These were seasoned pilots and crew chiefs, veterans of years in the air, and every one of them knew what those weather bands could do to a plane. Turbulence was only the start. The real killers were the ice shear, the microbursts, the ice building unseen on control surfaces. At the back of the room, Major Elise Ward listened in silence. She wasn't scheduled for flight duty. She wasn't even in the current mission rotation. Her last sortie had been weeks ago, and before that, months of desk-bound training assignments. But as the weather maps refreshed, showing the deepening storm, her mind wasn't on the danger. It was on the men on the ground. She'd flown the A-10 Thunderbolt II in worse conditions, at least in her memory's telling. Dust storms in the Middle East that turned the air to mud, blizzards in the Arctic Circle where the cockpit canopy frosted over before she'd even left the runway. But this storm, this one was different. You could feel it in the air, a heavy electric charge that made the hairs on your arms rise. The general's gaze swept the room again and stopped on her. "Don't even think about it, Ward," he said sharply. "This isn't about heroics. No one can fly in this storm." His words landed with the finality of a closed hangar door. But Elise didn't flinch. She took a slow breath, eyes on the blinking red marker. "With respect, sir," she said, her voice even, "you've got a problem on the ground, and there's one jet here built to solve it." Her statement hung in the air like a challenge. A few heads turned. The A-10 wasn't a fast jet, not compared to the sleek F-16s or Raptors on the flight line, but it could fly low, carry heavy ordnance, and, most importantly, take punishment like nothing else in the air. The general hesitated. Somewhere deep down, he knew she might be right. The storm would tear apart a lighter frame, but the Warthog had been built for ugly skies and ugly fights. Finally, he shook his head, half in disbelief, half in resignation. "You'll never make it back," he said. Elise allowed herself the faintest hint of a smile. "Then I'll just have to make sure they do." Within minutes, she was on the tarmac, rain plastering her flight suit to her frame, boots splashing through puddles as she climbed the ladder into the cockpit. The crew chief gave her a look that was equal parts admiration and fear. "You're insane," he shouted over the wind. "So they tell me," she replied, strapping in. And then the canopy came down, sealing her off from the world outside, leaving only the sound of her own breathing and the rising whine of twin turbofans hungry for the sky. The engines roared to life, their deep, guttural growl cutting through the howl of the wind. Even inside the cockpit, the storm made its presence known, a low, constant rumble punctuated by sudden cracks of thunder that made the canopy shiver. Rain hammered against the glass in heavy, uneven bursts, sliding down in jagged streaks. Outside, ground crew members hunched against the wind, their rain gear plastered to their bodies as they scrambled to pull away chocks and signal her clear. Elise's hands moved with deliberate precision. Every motion, flipping a switch, tightening a strap, adjusting a lever, was as much ritual as it was necessity. Her eyes swept across the instrument panel, checking and rechecking, hydraulic pressure, fuel mix, weapon systems, navigation. The coordinates for the recon team's last transmission glowed on the display, a tiny pulsing marker in the far north. Between her and that dot lay hundreds of miles of hostile air and a storm system pilots had already called suicidal. The tower's voice crackled through her headset. "Hog 2-1, conditions are not within operational limits. This is your final advisory. Abort mission and return to shelter." She didn't hesitate. "Tower, Hog 2-1 copies. I'll see you on the other side." Taxiing toward the far end of the runway felt like pushing against a living thing. The A-10's broad wings caught the wind like sails, and each gust shoved the aircraft toward the edge of the taxiway. She countered with small, confident corrections, eyes fixed on the yellow centerline glowing faintly under the runway lights. Visibility was down to less than 100 feet. Beyond that, the world was just a swirling wall of rain and darkness. At the threshold, she paused for half a breath, taking in the scene ahead. Sheets of rain moved sideways, the runway lights bending in the wind like reeds. Somewhere beyond that chaos lay open sky, and she intended to carve her way to it. Clearance came in a short burst of static and words. "Hog 2-1, you are go for takeoff." Her thumb pressed forward on the throttles, and the Warthog responded instantly, the engine screaming as they drank in air and fuel. The acceleration pinned her back into the seat, the wet runway a blur beneath. Spray erupted from the wheels in two wide arcs before the nose lifted free, and then the ground was gone. The storm didn't wait for her. The moment she cleared the tarmac, a violent wind shear slammed into the fuselage, jolting the aircraft sideways. Warning tones screamed in her headset. She banked into the gust, muscle memory guiding her through the correction. The jet groaned, but the controls held. Lightning tore across the clouds, close enough to sear her peripheral vision. The cockpit lit up in ghostly white, revealing every rivet and seam in stark relief. Thunder followed instantly, a deep, rolling concussion that seemed to vibrate in her ribs. She climbed through turbulence so violent her harness dug into her shoulders, each pocket of unstable air trying to yank the aircraft off course. Her breathing slowed, deep inhale, steady exhale. She'd trained for this, not just in simulators, but in the unkind skies over places where there was no such thing as safe weather. Her mind flickered to a memory, her first instructor at Davis-Monthan, leaning close in the sim. "The storm's not your enemy," he'd said. "It's the ocean you sail. Learn the waves, and you'll ride them." Breaking through 12,000 feet, she found a temporary pocket of relative calm. The walls of cloud rose around her like cliffs, their edges flashing in the electric light of distant strikes. In that moment, the storm felt almost alive, watching, waiting to see if she'd make a mistake. She pushed the throttle harder, threading through narrow corridors of open air that could close in seconds. Every adjustment mattered. Too high, and she risked icing over. Too low, and she'd vanish into the chaos. Then, through the hiss of static, a voice broke through on the emergency frequency. Position compromised. Taking fire. Need cover. Over. Elise keyed the mic without hesitation. This is Hog 2-1. Hold your position. I'm inbound. She knew they wouldn't believe it yet. No one was supposed to be in the air tonight. And yet, as she banked toward the coordinates, she felt the storm shift, not weakening, but changing its rhythm, as though it knew she had entered its territory. Ahead, beyond the next wall of cloud, the mission was waiting, and Elise Ward had no intention of turning back. The transition from the upper layers of the storm to the low-altitude run felt like stepping from one kind of danger into another. Up high, the battle was with nature, gusts, lightning, ice. Down here, the fight was with the terrain and the unknown. Her altimeter wound down as she guided the A-10 through a narrow gap in the clouds, the ground rising to meet her faster than she liked. Below, the world was a dark quilt of ridges and valleys, stitched together by rivers swollen from days of rain. The mountains stood like sentinels, their peaks hidden under swirling mist. Any one of those peaks could be hiding enemy spotters, and Elise knew the recon team's compromised transmission meant someone had already found them. Her radar lit with ghost returns, echoes bouncing off wet rock and thick forest canopy. It was useless for finding hostiles in this environment. She'd have to rely on her eyes, her instincts, and whatever she could coax from the ground team once she was close enough for a clearer signal.
Static crackled. Then a voice cut through, faint but urgent. Hog 2-1, this is Falcon Team. We have wounded, under heavy fire, can't move. Grid reference. The rest dissolved into noise. Elise tapped the side of her headset, leaning forward as if proximity could clear the signal. She caught the numbers, just enough to lock a heading. She descended further, the Warthog's engines now a steady vibration under her. The plane's broad wings and heavy frame, a disadvantage in speed, were perfect for this kind of flying. Low, slow, lethal. The GA-A-8 Avenger cannon sat like a promise in the nose, ready if she needed to clear a path. Then she saw it, the faint orange flicker of muzzle flashes against the black line of the tree line. Tiny sparks from this height, but unmistakable. Tracer rounds arced upward, fading before they could reach her altitude. Whoever was shooting wasn't equipped for high intercepts, but they were making life hell for the team pinned below. She banked left, circling wide to approach from an angle the enemy wouldn't expect. Her eyes scanned for anything that could be used as cover for her allies. A ridgeline, a depression in the ground, even a washed-out gully. A shape caught her eye, a narrow ravine running parallel to the firefight. If she could drive the enemy back into that, the team might have a chance to move. Elise keyed the mic again. Falcon, mark your position with smoke if you can. I'm about 30 seconds out. A pause, then the faintest reply. Copy. Red smoke, north edge of clearing. She dropped lower, skimming just above the treetops. Rainwater sprayed up from the canopy in her wake. Her eyes locked on the clearing, a chaotic scene even from here. Shapes moving, muzzle flashes flaring, smoke blooming in the wet air. Then she saw it, a thin trail of red cutting through the mist. Visual on smoke, she confirmed. Her thumb hovered over the weapons selector, not yet committing. The GA-A-8 Avenger was designed to tear armored columns apart. One wrong move, and she could flatten the very people she'd come to save. Instead, she made her first pass clean, using the Warthog's presence alone to send a message. She roared over the clearing at barely 100 feet, the engines howling like some ancient predator. Down below, the effect was immediate. Enemy fire faltered, men scattering for cover. It was a warning, and if they didn't take it, the next run would be different. Circling wide again, she adjusted her flaps, ready to commit. The ground team's survival clock was ticking, and every second gave the storm above another chance to close its jaws.
This was no longer just a rescue. It was a race against the sky itself.
The second pass would not be for intimidation. Elise pulled the A-10 into a tight climbing turn, feeling the G-forces press her into the seat as the Warthog's massive wings bit into the wet, unstable air. Her eyes never left the battlefield below. Through the swirling rain and drifting smoke, she could still make out the red marker at the north edge of the clearing. Falcon Team was holding their ground, but just barely, returning fire from what little cover they had, while the enemy pushed in from two sides. She flipped the master arm switch to hot, the HUD lit with weapons data, the crosshairs floating steady despite the turbulence. Her thumb slid over the trigger guard of the GAU-8 Avenger, that monstrous 30mm cannon that was as much the soul of the Warthog as its engines. She'd fired it countless times before, in training and in combat. But every time the effect was the same. The raw power of it was almost frightening. Falcon, Hog 2-1, be advised, gun run inbound, north to south. Stay down, mark if you can. A crackling reply came. Copy, Hog, we're flat in the dirt. She rolled the jet into a shallow dive, her sight picture filling with the tree line from which the hostile fire originated. The enemy had chosen well, a dark, rain-soaked forest with tangled undergrowth, hard to spot from above. But muzzle flashes betrayed them. In the split seconds between the storm's lightning, Elise saw the glint of wet steel, the jerky movement of figures scrambling to reposition. She squeezed the trigger. The cannon's roar drowned out the storm, a deep staccato growl that shook the entire aircraft. Spent casings poured from the belly chute in a glittering stream, tumbling into the mud below. The rounds tore into the tree line, shredding branches, collapsing makeshift firing positions, and sending bursts of dirt and debris skyward. The smell of cordite filled the cockpit, sharp and electric. Her first pass broke the enemy's forward push. Figures scattered deeper into the woods, some abandoning weapons in their rush to get clear. But she knew better than to think it was over. She pulled up, climbing to reset for another run. Falcon, status? She called. The reply came with a ragged edge of relief. Hog, you bought us breathing room. 2 wounded, both stable. But they'll regroup fast. Not if I keep them busy, she answered. For the next few minutes, Elise flew a pattern that was as much about psychology as it was about firepower. She varied her altitude and approach angles, never letting the enemy predict her next move. One run would be low and loud, scattering them with the sheer intimidation of the Warthog's engine screaming overhead. The next would deliver precise bursts into choke points, denying them any organized advance.
Between passes, she scanned the terrain for extraction options. The clearing was too exposed, the tree lines too close for a safe helicopter drop. But to the west, less than half a mile away, she spotted a washed-out riverbed, wide enough for a helo to hover in, with natural cover from the surrounding slopes. She marked it mentally, knowing it might be Falcon Team's only ticket out. The storm above was restless, its lower edges curling like the lip of a wave ready to crash. Lightning spidered across the sky in near constant flashes now, illuminating the battlefield in stark black and white. The rain had intensified again, hammering against her canopy so hard it sounded like small arms fire. Hog 2-1, be advised, the tower broke in. Radar shows the storm cell shifting south. You've got maybe 15 minutes before that valley becomes a blender. 15 minutes. Elise did the math. Enough time for one more heavy run. Then she'd have to coordinate extraction or risk being grounded by the weather. She nosed the A-10 down again, lining up a final strafing pass along the eastern tree line where she'd seen movement regrouping. The moment her crosshairs settled, she unleashed a sustained burst. The cannon's voice rolled across the valley like thunder layered over thunder. Trees snapped, dirt erupted, and the advancing shapes disappeared in the chaos. Pulling up sharply, she keyed the mic. Falcon, move to the riverbed west of your position. I'll cover your flank. You've got 10 minutes. The answer came fast. Copy that, Hog. Moving now. Elise set her jaw, scanning the edges of the clearing for any last pockets of resistance. The mission had shifted. This was no longer about holding the enemy back. It was about getting Falcon Team out alive before the storm closed its hand for good. Elise banked hard to the west, the G-forces pressing her deep into the seat as she kept the riverbed in sight. Down below, Falcon Team was moving, small, dark figures breaking from the tree line, darting low through ankle-deep water and knee-high brush. Even from this altitude, she could see the weight in their movements. Packs overloaded, 2 soldiers helping a third whose leg wasn't taking full weight. They were exposed now. No more dense cover to shield them, just open patches of scrub, slick rock, and the winding snake of the riverbed. I knew the enemy would see it too. The second they realized Falcon Team was withdrawing, they'd throw everything they had to cut them off before they reached that extraction zone. She pushed the throttle forward, bringing the A-10 into a tight loop to get eyes on the eastern flank. Sure enough, movement. Fast, coordinated, a line of figures slipping through the wet undergrowth toward an intercept point. Her thumb hovered over the weapons selector, switching from cannon to rockets. She didn't have the luxury of slow precision now. She needed to throw up a wall they couldn't cross.
Hog 2-1 to Falcon, she keyed in. You've got a squad moving to cut you off from the east. I'm making a run. Copy, Hog. We'll keep pushing. She dove low, angling in along the eastern tree line. The sight picture filled with dark shapes against lighter mud, moving fast. She released a short ripple of rockets, the warheads striking in staggered bursts. Explosions ripped through the wet earth, sending geysers of mud and water high into the air. The line scattered, breaking formation, the shockwave buying the team another precious minute. Climbing out of the run, Elise's eyes flicked to the horizon. The storm's southern wall was now a monstrous black mass, curling over itself in layers like some living thing. Lightning danced along its underbelly, illuminating ragged curtains of rain that swept toward the valley with terrifying speed. Her internal clock told her they had less than 10 minutes before the riverbed would be swallowed. She switched to the Falcon Team's frequency again. You're almost there. 400 meters. Keep moving. I'll cover from above. The Warthog became a shepherd in the sky, circling above the team's path, watching every angle. Twice more she caught movement, once along a ridge to the north, another time in the shadow of a boulder field. Each time she answered with short, controlled bursts from the GAA-8, the cannon's thunder cracking over the storm's growl. It rolled through the valley like a warning to anyone still thinking of advancing. Her focus narrowed to 2 points: the riverbed's widening curve, perfect for a helicopter drop, and the advancing edge of the storm. The wind had shifted, now gusting in irregular bursts that nudged the A-10 off course with every pass. She corrected each drift, knowing that one misstep here could send her dangerously low into the terrain. Then, through the rain, she spotted it, a faint flash of light in the riverbed, a signal mirror angled toward her position. Falcon Team had reached the zone. Relief surged in her chest, but it was brief. They still had to hold until extraction arrived. Hog 2-1 to Tower. Request immediate scramble of rescue helo to marked coordinates. Ground team in position. Storm ETA 7 minutes. The response was clipped but affirmative. Rescue 1 lifting now. 5-minute ETA. 5 minutes. It might as well have been 50 in a firefight. Elise made another pass, this time low enough to see the faces in the riverbed, mud-streaked, eyes locked on her jet, as if it were the only thing keeping the sky from falling on them. Her sensors pinged, movement on the western approach. She swung around, saw a cluster of figures trying to slip in behind the riverbed's natural cover. No time for a wide approach. She rolled hard into a banking dive, bringing the nose around until the crosshairs aligned. A squeeze of the trigger, and the GAA-8's voice filled the valley again, tearing into the ground just meters from the advancing squad. The shockwave alone sent them tumbling back.
As she climbed, the first drops of the storm's new wave began to hit the canopy, thicker, heavier, carried on a wind that shook the jet's frame. Off to the south, the extraction helicopter appeared as a small dark speck against the gray curtain. It grew quickly, blades beating the air until the roar joined the storm's cacophony. Elise keyed the mic. "Falcon, your ride's here. Go, go, go." From her vantage point, she saw them sprint, the uninjured taking point, the wounded supported between two strong shoulders. The helicopter flared above the riverbed, side door sliding open, a crew chief leaning out to wave them in. One by one, they disappeared inside. But it wasn't over yet. The enemy, seeing the escape, broke cover in desperation, firing wildly toward the extraction. Elise rolled in one last time, unleashing a curtain of fire between the helo and the incoming threats. Dirt and debris erupted in a chaotic wall, forcing the attackers back into the trees. Only when the helicopter lifted clear of the riverbed and banked away toward the base did she allow herself to ease off the throttle. The storm was closing in now, lightning licking the ridgelines, rain so dense it felt like flying through a waterfall. She pulled the A-10 into a climbing turn, angling for the narrow corridor of sky she'd used to get in. "Hog 2-1 to tower," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still burning in her veins. "Falcon team is secure. I'm coming home." The reply came with a warmth rare for tower comms. "Copy that, Hog. Bring her back safe." Elise spared one last glance over her shoulder at the valley, now disappearing under the storm's black curtain. They'd made it out with seconds to spare. The storm didn't let her go without a fight. Climbing out of the valley was like wrestling a giant, invisible hand trying to push her back into the darkness below. Rain slammed into the canopy in thick, slanted sheets, and every burst of lightning revealed the jagged ridgelines far too close for comfort. Elise kept her grip firm on the stick, making micro-adjustments to keep the Warthog level. The altimeter crawled upward, each 100 feet a small victory against the storm's weight. The climb felt endless, but finally the clouds began to thin. She broke through into a higher layer of turbulent air, the violence here more erratic but less suffocating. Above, a thin break in the ceiling revealed a dim band of evening light, the last scraps of the day bleeding away over the horizon. She took a breath and allowed her shoulders to loosen for the first time in nearly an hour. The tower's voice came through, steady but carrying an undertone she hadn't heard before: relief. "Hog 2-1, you are cleared direct to base. Rescue 1 is inbound ahead of you. All passengers accounted for."
Her eyes tracked the faint silhouette of the helicopter far in the distance, just a black smudge against the dying light. She imagined the faces inside. Falcon team slumped in their seats, wet, muddy, and silent except for the heavy breathing of those who'd been running on fear and adrenaline for too long. They'd lived to fight another day, and in the end, that was all that mattered. The flight back was quiet. No chatter on the radio, no sound in the cockpit but the hum of the engines and the faint whisper of wind where the canopy seals met metal. The storm was behind her now, but she could still see its anvil shape looming on the horizon, the kind of weather that would be talked about in the barracks for weeks. She knew the recon team would tell their version of the story, the part about a lone A-10 cutting through impossible weather to bring them home. But that was theirs to tell. Hers was simpler: a mission, a decision, and the stubborn refusal to leave anyone behind. The runway lights of the base appeared through the haze like a trail of fireflies. She began her descent, each step of the landing checklist performed with the same deliberate care she'd used before takeoff. Gear down, flaps set, throttle eased. The wheels kissed the tarmac with a muted thud, water spraying in a fan behind her as the brakes engaged. The Warthog rolled to a slow crawl before she guided it off the active strip and toward the waiting ground crew. When the canopy lifted, the humid air of the storm's wake washed over her. She pulled off her helmet, running a hand over her rain-matted hair before climbing down the ladder. The first person to meet her was the crew chief, his grin wide despite the water still dripping from his jacket. "You're out of your mind," he said, offering a hand.
She shook it firmly. So I keep hearing. The general was next. He stood just beyond the crew, his hat pulled low, rain still dripping from the brim. For a moment, he didn't say a word. He just studied her, as if trying to reconcile the order he had given earlier, "No one can fly in this storm," with the fact that she was standing here in front of him, the mission completed. Finally, he stepped closer. His voice was low, meant only for her. "You shouldn't have gone up." "And yet," Elise replied, her tone even, "they're alive." There was no anger in his eyes now, only something that looked a lot like respect. He gave a small nod. "Debrief in 1 hour." The formality was already creeping back into his voice, but the pause before he turned away told her everything she needed to know. As she walked toward the hangar, the Warthog looming behind her under the sodium lights, the sounds of the base returned. Engines winding down, distant rotor thumps from the helicopter, muffled voices of medics tending to Falcon Team. She could smell jet fuel in the air, mixed with the sharp tang of ozone from the lightning that still flashed far to the south. Inside the hangar, she paused to look back. The storm was moving away now, rolling its black mass toward some other unlucky patch of Earth. She knew there would be other missions, other storms, and maybe other moments where the decision would come down to the same thing: stay grounded or take the risk. For her, there was never really a choice. And as the hangar doors began to close, sealing out the night, she felt the quiet satisfaction of a pilot who had done exactly what needed to be done, no more, no less.